So as we think about entrepreneurial action, I think it's critical for us to establish a temporal context. At this point, I believe the standard when we talk about entrepreneurial action research is that knowing that action unfolds over time, really taking a longitudinal approach to understand exactly how action unfolds over time is almost becoming the standard. So with that said, I think it's becoming almost vital at this point for researchers to define at what point in the entrepreneurial process are we studying? Are we studying the pre-nascent phase where opportunities are being evaluated? Are we studying the nascent phase where nascent entrepreneurs are pursuing an opportunity and trying to move a venture towards startup that happens to be my contextual space of interest? Or are we talking about established entrepreneurs and different phases of an established venture? So I think it's important for that context to be defined. But that said, I think I turn it over to each of you and just perhaps ask you, what are maybe some key takeaways just in maybe perhaps our process and having had the opportunity to talk with experts and scholars on this topic? What are you feeling like we walked away from?
Sure. We were just talking about it a while ago. One of the key takeaways for me was that while we've invited these panel members to share different perspectives on entrepreneurial action, how there's a fair amount of overlap between these themes as well. One example that sort of stands out is when you talk about disability as shaping entrepreneurial action, it can be looked at from a physiological perspective, from a non-deliberative reasoning perspective, but it can also be looked at from a contextual perspective. How can disability create a certain structural context and shape entrepreneurship? Additionally, I think even the processual element can be brought in. So how does disability shape the identification of opportunities, the choices made, what vocations, what opportunities are chosen for exploitation, as well as it shapes later stages of entrepreneurship, the survival stage, the growth stage, as well as the evolution stage. And so one of the takeaways for me was, yes, while all of these perspectives by themselves are distinct and interesting, what is even more interesting is some of the overlaps. And so that was one of the key takeaways for me.
One key takeaway that I hear from all of the experts is how the consequence of entrepreneurship action, how entrepreneur look at the future, say the future consequences of certain possible action, and therefore in choosing to take that type of action. So the temporal perspective for entrepreneur is important, whether it happens objectively or subjectively. The second thing is, without doubt, is context, as you mentioned. We for sure need a mainframe theory for entrepreneurial action that is able to also be developed and address and provide certain predictive validity in what context.
Great, that's really insightful. For me, I really go back to the questions first. Once the temporal context is defined, in essence, where in the entrepreneurial process is entrepreneurial action being studied, whether it be, again, at the opportunity phase or anywhere in between, all the way up to, an established entrepreneur, different frames within the established new venture. Once that's been defined, I really go back to some really neat opportunities for what I think of some black box questions. Again, we know that action is unfolding over time, but in addition to what types of actions are taking place, the interesting questions are seeming to emerge around not just what, but when they're doing it, why they're doing those actions, and under what conditions these lead actors are taking those actions. And I'll make an important point here. or not taking action. I think there's a lot of meat on the bone, if I could use that phrase, for this idea around entrepreneurial inaction. What are the conditions around which individuals are avoiding or opting not to take action, particularly when they're, logically speaking, the individual should be taking action, or theoretically they should be taking action? I think those are really interesting questions that, and I know there's some interesting work coming down the pipeline, and I'm really interested to see how our knowledge can build around some of these areas. I have thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to work with the two of you on this professional development workshop. Obviously, this year presents quite a unique situation and year for us. We've had to take action and do so in a way that has required some pivots, but such is the case for all of our colleagues in the division. So with that said, Ann, I think I turn it over to you for any final comments in terms of how any folks interested in this PDW might go by contacting us.
So dear audience, we didn't forget about you. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to contact us, and our contact information will be listed below. And also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. So thank you again for listening to us and joining us in today's PDW.